Okay, family, coming back on with part six. Again, this is Joseph Atwill. He did a book, wrote a book, and also a documentary on the Romans created Christ. So here we go again, family.
Just crazy. And I would ask that any reader, who thinks that the thesis that I present is far-fetched, to simply take the 5 minutes it would take to dial Josephus up online, The Wars of the Jews, go to this passage, read it, and look at both the description of the human Passover lamb who's the son of Mary, and of the very sophisticated wordplay, which indicates that this is going to be, this myth of the world is going to create the bitter hatred of the Jews, and not, agree that this is that my interpretation is the correct way to understand this passage. The other thing that is important to recognize, and you'd have to read Caesar's Messiah to understand this, is that this event is also within a framework of events. This event is not simply just some sort of standalone event that just pops up in the middle of Wars of the Jews, but that this event is occurring in a pattern. Remember, I had originally talked about the fishing of men that begins Jesus' ministry and also Titus's campaign. Well, the episode of the Son of Mary, who is a Passover lamb, that event is occurring between the crucifixion of, it leads up to the crucifixion of three individuals and one person brought down from the cross who survives. And in other words, this event is within a framework of concepts which are parallel in both the Wars of the Jews and the Gospels that occur in the same sequence.
Okay. Were there any other extra biblical references to this besides from Flavius Josephus that lead you to believe that this was meant as anti-Semitism?
Well, I mean, some of the most famous are, of course, the speech by Eleazar at Masada, in which he takes a position that the destruction that the Jews experienced was brought about by God because of the fact that they were wicked. In other words, if you look at Jesus's perspective of Jews, he always talks of them in the context of a wicked generation. Right. Now, a generation is 40 years, and this, of course, would encompass exactly the right time frame to overlap with the military campaign of Titus Flavius, from 30 through 70 and from 33 through 73. These are the exact, time spans that would show that the Gospels are linking to the war. But in Eleazar's speech, you have this repetition of the wickedness of the Jewish rebels, which of course is a very clear parallel to Jesus's perspective. Jesus is looking into the future and saying that they're going to be wicked. Eleazar is talking as a character from history, saying we were wicked. And
so in other words, Jesus's words were really Eleazar's words.
Well, they're all coming from the same perspective. In other words, the authors of the speech of Eleazar is also the author of the Gospels, or at least they are a unified literary group who understand the same things and are creating the literature to have one particular idea, that the wickedness of the Jews, which Jesus was constantly referring to, and he was saying you have to repent. Well, what did they have to repent from? What was the sin? Jesus foresees the wickedness that brings about the destruction of the Galilean towns, the encircling of Jerusalem with the wall, and the razing of the temple. He sees the wickedness that brings that up. That's the rebellion. The Jews that Josephus is then writing about are all agreeing with Jesus that we were wicked. So that, and then of course this again is confirmed by the passage that I mentioned earlier, where Josephus just flatly states that, we are creating a myth that is designed to bring about the hatred of the Jews. The myth is, of course, the myth of Jesus, and it is confirmed, that myth is confirmed by the history. We shouldn't take either one of them seriously, neither the Gospels nor really Josephus's description of what goes on in Wars of the Jews. This is not a history we're dealing with. It's a literary operation to try to make people hate Jews, and of course, at one level, and also confine the real Messianic movement on the other.
Okay. Well, this is all very interesting, and I was wondering. I mean, why do people place such importance on the works of Flavius Josephus, and that Jews have gotten their history from the works of Flavius Josephus?
Sure.
And
unfortunately, the real voice of the Messianic movement was destroyed. In Wars of the Jews, Josephus records that the law, or that is the written scripture of the militaristic Jews, was brought into the Flavian palace and locked up and kept there. And of course, until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, they'd never found any actual Jewish material, even though this was a literate population. It appears to me that the Romans simply destroyed all of the literature. And then that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls were found buried, hidden in caves, because they were trying to preserve some of...
Well, I'm going to pause that right there. So, finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it wasn't to benefit the Almighty, Most High, chosen people. I don't believe that they actually found it. It came in at a time that they were about to move into the land. And that would have given them more leverage. The Jewish people, because to my understanding, they found them back in 1947. They moved into the land in 1948. Okay, more in depth. Because over the period of time, family, they were inching their way into the land. And what they did, they the more they got over there, they built up the military. Then they went up against the Palestinians. Like they always, like one will do, who's going to conquer you. They're going to come and, be friendly and come and like we good people and y'all good people, we all getting along, and then they got a mission to take over as they do and have done all other places. So I don't believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls was where the Most High wanted them to find it, or wants to find it, and then it has nothing where we know anything. It's still under lock and key. So if it is, just say, it is. There is a famous football player that went to Israel, and he got a chance to go into the chambers, he said, and see it. And he had already, self-taught himself Hebrew. And supposedly he had seen things he didn't supposed to see. Well, I don't want to say that they or anyone did anything to him, but he's not here anymore to tell his story. So you can look that up. I believe his last name is a White, but he played professional football. The other part to it is that there's so many people that have claimed hold that they have found different things here, there. But anything that ties back to us waking up and being the true people, the Most High will, to my understanding, and I can't say, oh, well, this can't possibly be, but the way how I would understand it and see it is that it would be on the forefront for us to get a hold to it. Now, if it's down the road, okay, it could be, but I just found it to be very odd that they came across the Dead Sea Scrolls are the ones found it when it was time for them to move into the land.
The scripture, and were able to do so, but the Gospels were put into an area, or were being into circulation in a form where they wouldn't have to compete against the actual Messianic scriptures. That was being destroyed systematically by Rome, and the Gospels were then something that would replace it.
Knowing that there's so much anti-Semitism in the New Testament, there are, the Jews and the Christians have been allied with each other for a long time now, and it's kind of a very unfriendly thing to do, to bring about these facts now and telling Christians that their religion is a military campaign and political propaganda. What would you have to say about that?
Right. Well, it's a great question, and I can't pretend to have a good answer to it. I would suggest that the transition culturally, if my thesis becomes widely held, which I expect it will ultimately, will be very difficult because it's such a transition of our understanding of ourselves, of our history, as well as our religion, particularly since the formation of Israel. We'll be challenged, by this information. As the geopolitics currently line up, you have Islam essentially in opposition to a unified Christian and Israeli community in some ways. Not in every case, but in some ways. And so something like this information can be threatening, I think, particularly to people who see that alliance as important. But I would point out that if you look at, for example, The Passion, the movie by Mel Gibson, you'll see that the problem with The Passion was not that it was an anti-Semitic endeavor, but that it was a very accurate endeavor. In other words, the story it told is really the story that the Gospels tell. And that story is very powerful and has been really what was responsible for the anti-Semitism that has been a 2,000-year burden upon that people. So that even though there is a tactical situation currently, that makes this especially awkward, this information, I would just say if you look with the long view, you'll see that everyone would be better off with an understanding of the truth. And I would also, point out, because I'm asked this all the time, and let me just give an example. Two of the very first people that I ever discussed my book with, once it was made public and people started reading it, were Christians that had contacted me, and both were terminally ill, and they were reasonably, they were very much using their religion as part of what was helping them go through the process. And they had read my book, and both of them came to the conclusion that it was either correct or seemed like it was correct. And they contacted me, and we exchanged information. And, it was extremely painful to go through the process of what my book really means to someone who's a Christian who's experiencing this crisis of faith as they're, looking at their life fading away. But both of them came to the position that I hope is the one that everyone does, which is that in every case, we're simply better off knowing the truth under any circumstance. It's very rare, and I don't think that, certainly not in a situation like this, that we'd want to deceive ourselves. And the other reason that I think it's important for the information to come out is simply that it's valuable to Christians. Not all of them, of course, but there will be a group of Christians who are very interested in the origins of the religion. And for those individuals, I just felt that I really was required to bring out the information. I couldn't keep it to myself because, if I was a Christian, a practicing Christian, and I was not, though I had been raised a Christian, but at the time I had written the book, with writing the book, I wasn't. But if I had been, I would have expected an individual who knew this to inform me.
Do you see any political implications to discovering your thesis?
It's one of these threads of the fabric of culture that once it begins to be pulled, it's not possible to calculate what will unravel as a result. There's never been really anything like it. It is the Caesar who produced the literature wanted to have this enormous, emotional, cultural disaster occur when the truth of Christianity would be discovered. In other words, the literature is a literary time bomb, and it's designed really to bring about legacy. It has all these other purposes. It was designed to pacify the Jews. It was designed to create anti-Semitism. But really, it's vanity. That's really what the literature is. it's just like the Arch of Titus. This enormous physical structure was created to, promote the legacy of a particular individual. The Gospels are meant to operate in the same way. And the fact that it's going to be this, enormous reversal of our understanding of ourselves, that's what the individual wanted. They want that explosion because they want the legacy. They want people to recognize how clever Caesar was to create this confusion, and the Gospels are going to eventually unravel. And incidentally, it really does. I mean, now that the information is out, some scholars contest my thesis. Others are supporting it. If you go on any of the many websites that discuss it currently, you'll see that there are, people who like it and people who dislike it. But ultimately, I am certain that it will eventually be the common understanding of the Gospels. Once the information has been brought out, it really can't ever be put back in the bottle. And it's just a question of how long the process is going to take. As far as I'm concerned, it can take, 2,000 years. I have no particular desire to be, sort of an anvil for this information. But now that it's out, in little increments and drips and drabs, just in different small ways at first, the people will start to recognize that the Gospels really aren't religious literature. They are a mockery of a particular genre of Judaic literature, typologic prophecy, and they are a vanity piece. They're really written to show off Caesar's genius.
Well, evidently, you have not been the...
So I just want to pause that again. So let's keep in mind that he's speaking of the Gospels. The Gospel, of course, is in the New Testament, which we know it's Matthew's, Mark, Luke, and John. And then there was a fifth one, right? That it was by Josephus, and they removed it out of the Bible. Okay. Now, what makes this so, unique to me as well is that as an Israelite, we have to look at it that the Most High always sent a Messiah, a ones like that he have anointed and appointed, whether they were an Israelite or not, to be a part of the redemption for us. See, these ones who have built up Jesus Christ as their God, they're the one, like he said, he was raised to be a Christian, but now, of course, he knows, he may understand that there's a God, because he didn't say anything about the Old Testament, but he did, and he's talking and speaking about the New Testament. I'm not saying the rest of the books are, something's wrong here, there, but we have to put a question mark where a question mark, come to, arise or whatnot, because, just looking at it from anything that contradict the Most High is a problem. But I've seen my Hebrew brothers and sisters day after day, time after time, go out of their way to justify it. Either they give their, understanding of a scripture through their interpretation. Not very, often I see this. Or they add to the scripture. Not too often I see this. But at the end of the day, we're trying to make something work for us. When in actuality, isn't this a brilliant way for us to worship their God, which is Jesus Christ? But still have you to think that, just change the picture. Make them black, and you just carry forth. You still go through Matthew. You still go through all these other books and be like, yeah. This is what he did. This is what he said. This is how he did. Family, we got to go, even much deeper than this. For yourself. Each person have to get there themselves. You understand? So I wanted to point that out. And then let's continue. I'm not sure how long I have in this video here, but this thing right here is not long. But if not, I'll come back with part 7.
First person to discover the Roman origin of Christianity. There have been others before you, but it's never been presented in the same way that you've presented these things in Caesar's Messiah. Do you think that this information that other people have done this and they've been called quacks? Do you think you're going to be called a quack?
I already have been many times. There has been a lot of scholars have speculated that Rome produced Christianity just because it's so historically logical. In other words, if you look at the history and you see that there is a messianic movement that's militaristic, and then you see, well, in the midst of this 100-year struggle, there is this pacifistic version of Judaism with all these strange Hellenistic attributes that pops up at just the right time. It's just very suspicious on its face. And scholars have attacked it in that manner. The information that I present is something that is testable. It's a little difficult to test it, but like a high school history class, for example, could test that the parallel passages that I claim are deliberately linked will be detected by a random sampling of random readers. In other words, if you just give them people 20 different passages to read from and then insert the one that I say is linked and then ask them, well, which one is the one that is linked to the passage in the gospel, you'll see that a very large fraction of people will recognize that, well, this has to be the fishing for men episode in Titus's campaign. Has got to be, is the one that is linked. And this is very unusual. The idea that passages can be seen as parallel is not something that occurs, all the time. It's very unusual. So the fact that these passages are occurring in the same sequence and in the same location and are recognizable by random sampling, it's very strong evidence. It's really hard to get around, and it certainly sort of takes it outside of the area of context or of quackery because it's testable. And this is what the people who came before me, who recognized that it was very logical that Rome would have produced this religion. The fact that the Pope, is the pontiff, which is the name of the head of the Roman College of Religion, the fact that Rome was the headquarters of the religion. All of these things are very suggestive of a Roman, relationship to the origins of it. The very first saints who were not apostles were Flavians, were relatives of the Caesars. Flavia Domitilla, the very first catacomb. Even today, the inscription is actually still there. She gave this to the Christians as their catacomb. So you have this relationship between the Caesars and Christianity from the very beginning. But what I've done is I've actually shown stuff that is really testable. Very easy for history classes to go through, the process I suggest, and they can verify for themselves that the ministry of Jesus was deliberately linked to Titus's military campaign. And there's also just coherency. Just go to Josephus 6:201 through 219. That's book 6, line 201 through 219, and read it. And you'll see for yourself that it's a very straightforward declaration that Rome produced it. So as far as being called a quack, so be it. In my debate with Dr. Robert Price, who never got down into name calling. In fact, he kept calling me brilliant, but then he would say brilliant, which is just sort of a way of dealing with a thesis that is hard to control, but you don't like. He said that it was parallel. Parallel mania. In other words, he just said that I was seeing metaphorical connections that didn't exist, and parallels, can be weak in two ways. This is very important stuff to know when you try to understand the Gospels and the relationship to Wars of the Jews. Parallels can be weak in two ways. They can either have no context or they can have no coherency. In other words, they are simply so far apart in where they come from. I mean, one like a Walt Disney story with something you find written on a wall of a pyramid. I mean, this context suggests that there's no connection because they're so distant historically, and how could the people be accidentally linking them up? Or they're not coherent. They just one person in a million see the metaphorical connection. Well, in the case of the parallels I show, the context is completely clear. I mean, Titus claimed that he was the Jewish Messiah. He flatly declared it. His official historian, actually wrote it out, just flatly states he is the Messiah. So the idea that the Gospels are regarding him as a Messiah is could not be a more coherent context. And then as far as coherency, I'll just give you an example. The one that Dr. Price was focused on when he used the expression parallelomania was the fishing for men. And he took the position that the metaphorical relationship between Jesus' words was self-evident. In other words, that when Jesus says fishing for men, the only thing he can possibly be talking about is going out and converting them to the new religion. Right? That's what he thinks the words